The yield curve is flattened. That's a signal of slower economic growth. If you trust the signal from the bond market, what do you do for stocks?
Well, it's a great question, Sarah. And I think for a lot of investors, they've been listening to the Fed commentary. And last week was interesting because we saw, stocks pull back on the commentary initially. And then we saw, like you mentioned, a rethink of the actual commentary. And the commentary was sticking to what's been said by the Fed for a few months now, which is we're sticking with, one of our mandates, which is to make sure expansion and growth and jobs are back in play. And we're not too much focused on what they believe is transitory inflation at this point. So, if the market's really been listening to lockstep the Fed, what the Fed has been saying, and the market's been kind of buying on that inclination. And I think for investors, you kind of want to stick with that situation, stick with that playbook, because that playbook hasn't turned investors wrong so far. So the growth play still strong. We saw the Nasdaq really perform well last week relative to the other indexes actually. So for growth investors, I think you're still in a good position here. Expansion and economy is still strong, so I think you want to stick with your playbook currently.
Yeah, well, on that theme, Paul, I'm curious. I don't know if you were listening to Mike Santoli right before you, but that underperformance of Apple and Amazon since September versus the Russell is really notable. And yet, of course, over the last 5 years, Amazon and Apple have dramatically outperformed the Russell. So my question, which would you rather own right now, the Russell or Amazon and Apple?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would rather own the mega cap tech stocks like Amazon and Apple just in the shorter term here. The reason Amazon and Apple have done so much better than the Russell 2000 is that they've been growing earnings at a much faster rate than the Russell 2000. So, yeah, they've done better, but there's earnings behind that growth. Their valuation versus the broader market is these mega cap tech stocks is relatively in line. The only one that's really high on a valuation basis is Amazon, but that Amazon has shown the ability to turn on the earnings faucet whenever it feels like it. So in that respect, I think you'll be better served in those names because they are reasonably priced and growth. Some of the hyper growth stocks, that may be an area where you still want to avoid and be a little bit more conservative on, but growth at this reasonable price, I think you're in good hands there.
The other group I wanted to ask about, Delano, is the reopening plays. Some of them are working today, like airlines. They've been so hot, and obviously that's real. We're seeing it translate into the real economy with the comeback of demand. Has that been played out, though? If you are looking at the bond market and you are expecting slower growth and a Fed tightening cycle eventually, what happens to those reopening plays? Is it already priced in?
I think some of it's priced in, but I still think there's room for upside here, Sarah. And I think a lot of that reason is we've mentioned, and a lot of people talk about, is this big boom that we're going to be seeing, which we're still not fully through the reopening, right? American Airlines, I believe, is what you mentioned. They had to cancel some of their flights just because there's so much pent-up demand that isn't being fulfilled with current, working workers that they have ability to fulfill that demand. So the reopening play is still there. Some of the metrics you want to look at as an investor is obviously personal spending. You want to track that and seeing if spending month to month is still increasing. You want to look at retail sales. You want to look at these different areas to kind of track how this reopening is playing out. I definitely think there's still more room to the upside. We're not even all the way through summer. You mentioned it was the first day of summer. We're not even through summer yet. I think there's a lot more for some of those reopening plays to go.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.